Hi everyone, this is the demo for International Foods for the week of May 3rd through May 7th. And we are now currently in our Oceania unit. So today's recipe is going to be a New Zealand beef and cheddar pies that are going to be done in a muffin pan using puff pastry, which we haven't used yet this year. So I'm going to show you the particulars about that and some things that will make it a lot easier to work with something like puff pastry. So we're going to start off with, back here on the burner, I've got a large saute pan, right? And I've got my wooden spoon ready. I'm going to get the burner going on low just to get it heated up to give us a little bit of head. About a tablespoon's worth of olive oil. And we're going to start with some onion and garlic, okay? So just a small onion, nothing super big. So we're going to cut off that stem end, right? We're going to get this cut in half here and peeled up. So fresh onion, fresh garlic, going to give us some nice flavor. And this has a nice thick beef gravy base to the filling, which is going to be beautiful with a nice buttery puff pastry. Okay, so I'm going to get all that out of the way here. All right, right into the trash. So with our onion, we are going to do a small dice. So this is our root end there. So I'm going to slice down at an angle, right, to get a little bit more layering effect in there. Remember, slice down towards the root, but not through the root. So we can come back in and dice this up. So the onion is going to be the first thing to go into our pan. Use up every last little bit. And when the onion's been cooking for a little bit, then we'll add in our garlic. We don't want to add the garlic in too quickly because we don't want it to burn. This is a ground beef-based recipe. But you could also sub out things like ground turkey if you're trying to be a little bit healthier, maybe cut down on the amount of beef that you eat. It will work with ground turkey as well as ground chicken. So I'm just going to take this and get this straight into the pan. A little bit of sizzle. It's kind of hard to hear from where you're at. But I'm going to get this going nice and slow. A little slight sizzle. And we're going to do 1 clove of garlic minced up. So give it a good whack. Peel your garlic, get all that off of there. And then, like I said, anytime you look for that little stem end, cut that little dry piece off. Now we're going to hit this with just a little pinch of kosher salt, just so it doesn't slide everywhere as we're chopping. All right, so start giving it a little rough chop for our garlic. We want to get this into some nice, fine, minced pieces. Once this is partially cooked, the onion garlic mixture, then we'll be adding our ground beef into that to cook. So we want to get this nice and small because we want the flavor of the garlic to be subtle and not the dominant flavor, but well blended in. Okay. So now I'm going to take and just stick this into a little dish here on the side for a second. So we can get rid of our cutting boards. We're going to need some workspace for working with our puff pastry today. Now you can hear the onion sizzling here on the stove. So we just want to give it a stir occasionally. A little bit of color, a little caramelization on the onions is fine. And give that another minute or so, and then we're going to add in our garlic. Okay, so let me just get this cutting board out of the way. Now, I'm just going to wipe down the counter because I did have a damp towel under the cutting board so it wouldn't slide. We want to work on a nice dry counter or surface, nice and clean and dry for our puff pastry. Okay. So now these are going to be done, like I said, in a muffin pan, but you could make a big pie, but it's nice to have something small that you could just have for a lunch, right? Okay, so now I'm going to add in the garlic. And then we're going to use some nice ground beef. So 1 pound of ground beef is going to go into this recipe here, right? whichever fat percentage you usually prefer. I use an 80%. I like to have a little bit of fat to help make the roux for this gravy, for these types of recipes. And the higher fat percentage when you're doing things like this, like pie filling, meat pies, helps keep a lot more moisture in there too, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm using the back of the spoon. I'm just gonna break this meat up just a little bit and let it start cooking. The idea of a minced meat pie is that it's little small pieces of meat and not big chunks. So we're gonna do about a half a teaspoon or so of salt, a couple of good pinches. You can use the spoons to measure for accuracy, and a few good cranks of black pepper. Okay, that's our base seasoning for this. We'll be adding in more flavors after, like this. This is going to be a gravy type filling. So it'll be nice and thick. Let that start to do its thing. So just breaking that meat up as it's cooking. It's a little bit easier to do after it's been in the pan for a minute or so, once the chill is taken out of it. And just let it do its thing. So we're going to talk about the puff pastry. Now, this is puff pastry that comes frozen, right? So you do have to let it thaw, but you make sure that you thaw it in the refrigerator overnight. Okay, so there is a little bit of pre-planning of making sure that this is done and pulled out the night before. Like I said, from the freezer to the fridge. Keep it in the fridge. This just came out. You want to keep it super cold. Inside this package is 2 sheets of puff pastry. Now, puff pastry is very similar to things like a croissant or a Danish dough. It is very high in real butter. So when they make the dough, butter is folded into the layers. So it is super rich in butter. But as you know, if you let butter sit out, it gets soft at room temperature. So you want to make sure that this stays nice and cold to work with, because this will get chilled too before it goes in the oven, right? Now, when you're looking at the puff pastry, you're going to see that when you open it up, there's these little sheets, parchment strips. You can take those out and remove them, right? And there is your puff pastry. Like I said, the basic flour dough, but lots of butter is mixed in. You can see a little bit of flour here as well, okay? We're going to put a little bit of flour onto our work surface. We don't want to go heavy on the flour. We just want light dusting. Add more as we need to. We just want to make sure that our dough is not going to stick to the surface when we're working with it. Now, since we're going to be doing this in a muffin pan, we're going to need to cut circles. So it's about a 3-inch circle for the top and about a 4-inch circle for the base of this. And this one's not quite 4 inches. So I'm going to roll this out a little bit, cut it, and roll each circle out just a little bit more to make sure that I have enough to fit inside the muffin cup. All right. So I don't want you to forget, we've got going on back here, our pan. So I'm going to break up the rest of this meat now that it's had a chance to heat up. Mostly cooked, right? It's about halfway. Everything's going into the one pan. So at this point, I'm going to add in a little bit of Worcestershire sauce. Right. It's used in a lot of recipes, particularly English, British recipes, right? But this is Worcestershire, which has molasses and a vinegar base, so it's going to add a lot of spices. So about a teaspoon. You can measure that with the spoons if you're more comfortable that way. I like to just give it a couple of shakes. You do this long enough, you get a good eye for those things, right? Now, once your ground beef mixture is pretty much cooked through without any pink, that's when we're going to do the last part of this, which is to make our roux type base, right? So we need to thicken with flour, and then we're going to add in our beef stock to it to make a gravy, okay? So we're at that point right now. Now you're gonna notice I'm not draining any of this mixture, right? Right now it's just a very loose, ground beef, onion, garlic, right? But it's got the fat in there still. So that's why I said I like to use that 80% ground beef for these types of recipes. So I want some of that fat in there so I can do this part. So we're going to do 3 level tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Right, so nice and level. Right up on level it to the side of the container. So 3 of those. Beautiful. And then you want to let this flour cook through for a minute, right? So we want to make sure that it gets well blended. The flour is in liquid freely without being mixed into something like a roux first. It'll get lumpy, and we don't want lumpy gravy. So we want to make sure that this flour gets mixed in. You'll start to notice that it'll thicken it up, and that flour is absorbing all that moisture from the onions and the fat from our ground beef. So the last part of this to make the gravy is we need the liquid. So it's going to be 1.5 cups of beef stock. So beef broth, beef stock. You can do ones that are lower in sodium so they don't get too salty. And we're just going to add that whole thing into our pan. So 1.5 cups. And at this point, it's pretty much done except to thicken up. Okay, and I do have some part of a batch. I'll be able to show you that it's already thickened and cooled. So because our puff pastry, that butter needs to stay super cold, you want to make sure that your filling that you're putting in before you put them into your little muffin cups is completely chilled. So we've got some that's already chilled for that. So we're going to go back to our puff pastry sheet here to show you that. So I've got my rolling pin, and we're going to want to put a little bit of flour on the pin as well. Right, just a little bit here. Make sure we're not sticking to anything. Right. You can dust a little bit of flour on top. So like I said, we're going to lengthen this out, this puff pastry sheet out a little bit. So one sheet will do about 6 of the cups. So this will make 12 muffins, basically. So we're just going to lengthen this a little bit. Like I said, I'm not stretching this too much because I'm going to roll these a little bit thinner after I cut them. Because like I said, my circle is like 3 3/4 of an inch or so. So I need just a little bit more give that way, right? So I want to make sure I can come in and cut at least 3 across, right? You can score and just kind of give yourself a guide, give it a little press to see ahead of time, right? And make sure that you're going to be able to get that many in, okay? So I'm going to come in now and cut 6 of my circles. And these are the 4-inch circles. That's what this is going to end up being. And I'm trying to cut as close as I can to the previous one, so that way we're not wasting any of this, right? You can use the puff pastry scraps. It's like anything like pie dough. It never really rolls well the second time. So I'm going to just set these to the side here for a second, because we also need to cut some tops for our little beef and cheddar pies. Okay. But for that, I can roll it thinner here. So we're going to use this last edge to roll out and give me the smaller ones. A little bit of flour under here just to make sure they don't stick. Okay. And so now this I can roll out and get a thinner puff pastry sheet. So I'm going to need 6 tops to go with the 6 bases. Right. Like I say, you can re-roll. It's never as good on a re-roll, but it'll still work, especially for the tops. So we're a little bit shy there. I'll be able to squeeze one more out of there in just a second. I'll roll it a little bit more. 3, 4, 5. Just big enough to fit our cutter. There we go. Okay. So put our scraps to the side, out of the way. So I've got my 6 tops now. Now with this, the filling, I'm going to take you back here to take a peek, right? And at this point, now it's thickened up nicely. It's a nice gravy consistency to it, right? That's what we want. So you let this come to a simmer, which I've been doing while I was working on the puff pastry with you. And you want to let it reduce down until it gets to a nice thick gravy. So this probably, turn the heat down just a little bit. And let this go probably another minute or 2. So now we want to work with our muffin pan. So for your muffin pan, I've got one here that's the 12. You can use the 6, whatever you got, because I'm going to end up making 12. So I figured we'd go with the bigger pan. Now, you want to make sure that you use a little bit of that nonstick cooking spray beforehand, right? And I usually do this. I put my pan in the sink, spray it, so that way you don't get this all over your floor, or you can do this over a trash can. All right, so you want to give it a good spray to make sure that it's nonstick coated all the way through, even if it's a nonstick pan. Now, we're going to go back to our large puff pastry circles. We're going to make them slightly bigger so that they fit the 4 inches, because it's going to go down inside of our pan, right, to make that cup. So I'm just going to lengthen these out a little bit. That's why I didn't roll these too thin the first time, because now I've got a bigger 4-inch circle that I can come in, set it over the center, right, and then bring it down. So if a little bit hangs over the edge of the top, that's perfectly fine, because we're going to be crimping our top down anyways. You can get it so that it's mostly inside the cup. Right? So I'll do that again to show you. Now, the thing is that before I fill these, I want to make sure that these are completely chilled. So you can take, once you have all the bottom cups filled with your dough, with your larger circles, take and stick this in the freezer for about 15 minutes, or you can just do this, put this in the fridge for about an hour while your filling mixture is cooling at the same time. And then you can pull it out and fill them in. Because by putting this into the freezer for 15 minutes or back in the fridge for about an hour, it's going to firm that butter back up. Now, the key to puff pastry to get the puff is caused by steam. So same thing as for croissants or danishes, that when you take a dough that's really loaded with butter, like this is, and you get it good and cold, that butter is going to melt quickly in the oven. And when it does, it creates steam inside the dough. And that steam separates into many flaky layers. So that's why a really good, authentic croissant is so light and flaky. So puff pastry is the same way, right? Gives it that nice crispy crunch to it. Right? So once this is all set, like I said, I've got my base circles in here. Then I will come back, put this to the freezer or the fridge, right? Freezer 15 minutes, fridge for about an hour, to let that firm up nicely before I ever put the filling in. And the filling, once my filling's cooked that I've got here on the back burner, I'm going to show you in a second, right? So now this is ready to go back into the freezer or the fridge, right? Depending on how much time you have. Now, the filling that I have back here, as you can see, is now getting nice and thick, right? And that's what we want. So now at this point, this will thicken up more as it cools. So I'm going to turn the heat off, right? And then this is what the finished filling looks like, right? So really super thick, right? So that gravy, once you reduce it down for about that 5 minutes that I've had this one on the stove here, it makes a really nice filling. But there's still a component missing, which is our cheddar cheese. It's going to be the next. So we're going to be using some white cheddar that's already shredded, which is fine. So it's about 3/4 of a cup to a cup for the full recipe. This is only half of the mixture here. So I'm going to do about a 1/2 cup of shredded white cheddar cheese. You could shred your own. That's perfectly fine. I like them a little bit on the cheesier side, so that's why we're going with 1/2 cup. But you want to make sure that that filling's cold and your cheese is cold before you do this part. Otherwise, it's going to melt before it can melt in the oven, right? And you want this to be melty and gooey inside of your puff pastry cups. All right, so we're just going to give this a good stir to make sure that cheese gets well blended through, right? And now our filling is all set and ready to go. So our beef, our broth, our flour, our Worcestershire, salt, pepper, and now our cheddar cheese. Now I have some cups ready to fill. So I'm just going to grab those from the fridge right now. They've been in here for a while, an hour or so. And some tops. So now these are the cups that have been filled, and they're firm. Like I can't really even press this out of shape. I have to really push to move that dough. Okay, so that's what you want. So now that butter is re-solidified. It's like a hard stick of butter from the fridge. That's what you need. Okay, so this one was sprayed, shaped. I said the dough's in, and then they were chilled. So these were in the fridge for the last hour while Chef was doing other things. So now I'm going to take and fill up each of these little cavities. So a good spoonful. Press it down in the bottom really well. To try and work out any air pockets. So when you get it to about the point where it's level to the top of the cup, that's good. All right. Probably do a little bit more on this guy. Like I said, we want to work out those air bubbles so we get a nice, tight, packed little pie. That filling mixture. And if you're not sure if you've got enough for each, go in and put, divide it evenly as you go through. And then you can always go back, to fill the second time, right? To top each one off a little bit. Now, the only other thing you're going to need for these is a little bit of egg wash. Which I've got an egg already cracked over here. I'm not bothering with a second egg to show you for demo purposes because you've seen me crack eggs plenty of times lately with demos. But one egg will definitely do a couple dozen of these easily. So, like I said, this was half the batch of the filling for our 6 cups. So you can see we're pretty good on thickness here. I don't want to waste any of this, so we're going to top each one off just a little bit. I think it needs a little more. That way we're not wasting it. Right, and this filling is fully cooked through, so this doesn't take long to heat up in the oven either because you're basically just trying to cook the puff pastry shells, okay? So there's our filling at this point. Now, let me just grab some here. There we go. Now we've got our egg wash, which is just 1 egg that I cracked with a teaspoon of cold water, okay? I've got a little pastry brush here, and I'm going to come in and brush a little bit on the inside edge of each of these cups. Just a little bit. We're going to put some on the top as well to give us a beautiful golden color. But this is to help glue our top down. I'm going to show you another trick for the back side of the tops as well. So a little bit of egg. Our cups are primed to get their lids. Now, I've got some of the tops here, the top circles, that are already been cut previously and chilled. So that way they're cold, right? They're not flimsy. You can see like these ones here are like flimsy dough, right? So that's why you want to put them in the fridge. So I'm going to take my egg wash and just put a little bit on the outside edge of one. And that's the one I'm going to flip to seal. Okay? See that in just a second. This way I'm making sure that I'm getting a good seal. Now, if you notice that they tighten or shrink a little bit, if your circle's not quite fitting, give them a little stretch with your fingertips, right? This will soften up pretty quick. Now, it is best, too, to also chill these again for a few minutes if you can. Just pop them in the freezer for a couple minutes, especially if you've taken a long time to work with them. The heat of your hands, things like that, will affect the dough. So if you can chill it again, if not, you can put it right in the oven. It'll be okay. Right? But the biggest thing is trying to make sure that they're sealed nicely and not going to pop open. They might be bent a little bit. They're still tasty. It's okay. Puff pastry is very temperamental, right, when it comes to things like this. So we're going to put each of our circles on. And then we're going to put an egg wash on top. So that way we'll get a really beautiful golden brown color. I'm just giving some of these just a little stretch because they do shrink a little bit as they rest, just like any dough. Yeah. So we've got our tops on. We're going to come in with just a regular dinner fork. And I'm just going to press on the inside, that top to our bottom. So I'm just coming inside that edge. Now you're also going to want to have a little steam vent to these so that they don't explode out the side. You're going to try and control where it breaks by having that little steam vent in the very top center. Just something that's common when you're making pies as well. So I'm just going to press here. One more. So just like a little pie. So instead of pie dough, puff pastry. A lot lighter, flakier, crispier texture-wise if you've never had it. Okay. So I'm going to come in and cut a little vent pocket here. Just a little slit in the top of each one. And there we go. Now hit it with each one with a little bit of egg wash. And this can go into a 425-degree oven. Could take up to 20-25 minutes, but start checking them about 12 to 15 minutes, depending on how hot your oven runs, because you want your puff pastry to be golden brown, but not burnt. Okay. And you may hear at times some sizzling and things like that, little juices leaking out onto your pan. That's perfectly fine. You could always put this on a sheet pan and then into the oven in case anything does leak. But that is your New Zealand pies set and ready to go in the oven. Like I said, best if you can put them in the fridge or the freezer for a few minutes just to set that top up again, since by touching it, it softened up a little bit. So I do have some that are done. So these just came out of the oven a few minutes ago. Here we go. Look at that. Those are your beef and cheddar pies. Beautiful, flaky, golden crust, right? Now, what you can do is, just to make sure that they're going to come out, let them cool for about 10 minutes in the pan and just come in with a little butter knife and run your knife around the outside edge. And you can pull them out like that. Look at that. Okay. So beautiful, light, flaky, right? Holds its shape beautifully. Right, we're going to cut into this so you can see the inside. You can hear that little bit of that crunch, right? So it's that beautiful filling. Look at that. Okay, so that is your New Zealand beef and cheddar pies. Like I said, make sure that you get them good and cold before they go in the oven. So pop these back in the freezer for a few minutes and then straight into that hot oven. Start checking them about 15 minutes or so to make sure that they're not going to burn. And that's it. You have your beef and cheddar pies, right? That was cute. Tasty, yummy, snack size. And we'll make a dozen, so I'll make enough to share.